Now, I want to talk about a psychologist specialising in addiction. Cameron Brown's his name. He says that retired footy players are among the greatest risk for drug use, and because of the way that the high they get when they're actually playing sport. I want to find out more about it. On the line now, Cameron Brown, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I read some of the material to start with about this idea of a link between athletes and addiction. And to be honest with you, I thought, oh yeah, just an excuse. But then I started to think, well, if athletes talk about getting a high when they break through the pain barrier and they get a high from their athleticism, then I suppose it makes sense they may be looking for a high either after their competition finishes or in down days.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, that high, what they call the runner's high, is very much a result of endorphins, which very much mimics the action of other drugs, things like morphine for one, but other drugs that may target the reward system in the brain.
So if you get an athlete who is maybe over some years has had this endorphin experience, this rush of pleasure and excitement, are they then more susceptible for their brain and body to be saying, hey, I like that, let's find other ways to get it?
Yeah, I mean, that could definitely be the case, and much to say in every other high-stress industry, we do see people ending their career and looking for other avenues to get that same sort of excitement in their life, and for some of those, they do turn to drugs and alcohol. And
this is where sometimes methamphetamine and cocaine would step in?
Yeah, absolutely, as well as every other illicit drug, as well as alcohol as well, because they do mimic the same reward circuitry in the brain that does give that stimulation and tells the brain, I like that, let's do it again.
But on the other side of this, I would think that athletes are far more disciplined, say, than I am, and a lot of people would be. And so because of just what they have done in their lives, surely they'd have more discipline to say, this is wrong, this is bad, I'm not doing my body any good by following this path.
Yeah, true, but the same goes for things like depression and anxiety. It's really not a choice. In the end, we don't come down to say that addiction is a choice that someone chooses. And in saying that, if we're looking at the end of someone's career, we look at also them losing a lot of the support networks, whether that's social or financial or sponsorship. We see them lose a lot of those support networks that they may have previously had to get them through those hard times.
How much of that could add to that the hero worship, the adulation, the things like, I'm a star and suddenly I used to be Joe Blow hero?
Yeah, addiction is what we call a biological, social and psychological illness. And all of those things impact the illness. And like you say, if someone has the adoration of the fans, hundreds of thousands of people loving them and cheering for them, and then that disappears, and the next new guy's on the scene, then that absolutely may lead to some self-esteem issues or depression or anxiety that may then knock on into substance abuse.
Yeah, I noticed you use the word illness. Are you one of those people who thinks that addiction is a disease or an illness?
Yes, absolutely, and more evidence is showing us that it is an illness in the reward circuitry of the brain.
Okay, but you don't say it's a disease, would you?
Well, it's called the disease concept. It is the way we describe.
Yeah, see, we'd part company on that, because I would say that cigarette smoking is an addiction. Lung cancer from cigarette smoking is the disease you get. I make that distinction, and I think it's a fair one to make. Yeah,
okay. Absolutely, and we can see that, obviously, in that concept of choice. But the other thing is, though, that we see in imagery studies of the brain, is that people who suffer from addiction, their brains don't actually work in the same manner as those who don't use drugs, and we can then extrapolate that against, say, heart disease. When we look at imaging studies of both of a normal and a diseased heart, then we can see that they're not, one of them is not working the same way. So in that term, that's why we term it a disease per se.
And so, how do you quote cure this illness?
Mm-hmm. So the illness is confronted, I suppose, on those three levels. Biologically, psychologically and socially. So socially changing social networks that may encourage use, psychologically changing underlying belief systems, and biologically obviously removing the drug, as well as increasing things like adaptive mechanisms, things like exercise again, and sometimes in some cases other medication.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to exercise. Okay, it's a fascinating theory. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Psychologist who concentrates on addictions. That's Cameron.